What's up, people? I'm Tangy Nacho, and welcome to the recap of Overwatch League Season 2, Stage 1, Week 5. This was, of course, a shorter week with only matches on Saturday and Sunday, so the video will also be shorter accordingly. At the end of the video, I'll be giving my full predictions for the Stage 1 playoffs, so make sure you stay tuned for that, like the video if you're excited, subscribe, and now let's jump right into the matches. First up on Saturday was Washington Justice versus the Paris Eternal. What this match proved to me was that all the hype behind Paris was pretty much unjustified. Coming into the league, everyone was saying Paris was going to be the best 3-3 team, this and that, but they went up against the Washington Justice, one of the worst teams in the league right now, and almost lost. The scariest part is that we're going to be going into different metas in the future of Overwatch League, so it's just going to get worse for Paris. Meanwhile, Washington can just attribute their lack of success this stage to the meta and look forward to the next stage. The match ended up going 2-1 in favor of Paris. Next up was the London Spitfire versus the Seoul Dynasty. This match had crazy playoff implications. Basically, whichever one lost was out completely. And in pretty dominant fashion, Seoul Dynasty defeated the London Spitfire 3-0. That means the Season 1 Overwatch League champions are out of the Stage 1 playoffs in Season 2. I don't think there's a single person out there that would have predicted that. I guess it really is just not their meta. They're more of a dive team. Jester is more of a Winston player. He has said multiple times he doesn't like playing Reinhardt. So I guess they're looking forward to a meta change going into the next stage. As far as Seoul, up to this point they haven't looked super great either. But in this match they looked like they were pretty much on fire. Whenever Fissure plays against one of his old teams he absolutely pops off, and this game was no exception. Seoul did end up making it into the playoffs, so we'll be talking more about them in a little bit. Like I said, it ended up 3-0 Seoul. Then the third match on Saturday was Boston Uprising versus Dallas Fuel, and this was another one with heavy playoff implications. Dallas and Boston were pretty much even on the standings going into the match, and they were also right on the cusp of the playoff cutoff, so the feeling in the air was basically whoever wins gets in and whoever loses is out. And that is exactly what happened. It was a really good match, but in the end Boston Uprising came out victorious. I feel bad for the Dallas Fuel because they came extremely close, ended up in 9th place, just under the cutoff, and this is pretty much their best meta to date, so I would have loved to see them in the playoffs. But you know I'm hyped Boston made it in. They may be the bottom seed, but they made it. Nobody expected them to make it into the playoffs in Stage 1, and nobody expects them to take a win either, but you never know. In this match specifically, I think it came down mostly to Dallas Fuel making mistakes than anything else. They took it to map 5, but Boston ended up winning 3-2. Then to close out the day we had the Atlanta Reign versus the Chengdu Hunters. This may have been the best match of the week just because Jinmu was popping off on Pharah and we don't get to see that very often. Chengdu always plays these off-meta comps with the DPS players, and typically it doesn't work out great, but this was actually a super close match. For some reason Atlanta just seemed like they couldn't get themselves together. Regardless of the outcome, Atlanta was going to make it into the playoffs and Chengdu wasn't, but Chengdu ended up taking the win 3-2. Moving on to Sunday, we had the Philadelphia Fusion taking on the Paris Eternal. And I would say, other than the London Spitfire, these two teams are probably the two biggest letdowns of the stage. Philadelphia did look pretty dominant throughout pretty much the whole set, but really it was a lack of coordination on Paris' end than the skill on Philadelphia's. I'm honestly very surprised that the Fusion placed so high this stage, we'll talk more about that later, but I'm not surprised at all that Paris didn't make it into the playoffs. By the end of the match it was 3-1 Philadelphia. Next up we had the Washington Justice versus the Florida Mayhem. Washington was looking for their first franchise win, while Florida was looking to not be the person that lost to them. After a pretty depressing but close match, Washington got their way. It came down to a map 5 and Washington played against the Florida Mayhem's Hamster really well. Obviously neither of these teams made it into the playoffs, they're both bottom 3 teams, but I was happy that Washington was able to take the win 3-2. Then we had the Houston Outlaws versus the Atlanta Reign. I really like both these teams, but honestly, Houston did not put up much of a fight. This was pretty much the only match of the day that actually had playoff implications, because after Atlanta's loss to Chengdu the day before, both teams were 3-3 and looking to push themselves to that 4-3 mark to make the standings. Unfortunately for Houston, it seems that GOATS is just not their meta. Then again, Dive isn't their meta either. What is Houston Outlaws meta? I really don't know. Comment below what meta you think suits the Houston Outlaws the best. Anyway, Atlanta looked better against the Outlaws than they did against Chengdu, and they took the win 3-1. Then lastly, we had the Guangzhou Charge versus the Vancouver Titans. Nobody really expected this to happen, but if Guangzhou won 4-0, they would have made it into the playoffs. Of course, what happened was the exact opposite, and the Vancouver Titans won 4-0 instead. And they were pretty much trolling on the 4th map on Dorado too. The Titans just seem like they're from another world, like they basically don't lose any maps. I'm super excited to watch them in the playoffs. Unfortunately for Guangzhou though, they didn't quite make it in. We rounded out Stage 1 with a 4-0 victory for the Vancouver Titans over the Guangzhou Charge. And so, following the matches, we had our top 8 for the Stage 1 playoffs. In first place was the Vancouver Titans, 7-0 with plus 18 map differential. Then the New York Excelsior, also 7-0 but with plus 16 map differential. Tied for third is Philadelphia Fusion and Toronto Defiant, 5-2 plus 5. In fifth, Atlanta Reign, 4-3. At number 6, another tie between San Francisco Shock and Seoul Dynasty, 4-3 plus 5. And at the bottom in 8th place is Boston Uprising, 4-3 plus 3. So there were 2 pairs of teams that had tied records, and there was 2 different ways they could settle it. San Francisco and Seoul decided to play an off-stream match, basically just a normal set but they didn't stream it. The Shock ended up winning it, so they'll be in 6th place for the playoff bracket, and Seoul will be in 7th. The other 2 though decided to do a coin toss instead of playing a match. Not really sure why, but Toronto Defiant ended up winning the coin toss, so they get 3rd seed, and Philly takes 4th. So now, looking at the bracket, on Thursday the first match will be Seoul Dynasty versus New York Excelsior. That's the 7th seed versus the 2nd seed. To me, it's pretty obvious that New York is gonna win, but Seoul does look a lot better as of their match against London, so you never really know. New York hasn't shown any signs of weakness though, so I'm gonna go New York Excelsior 3-1. Then it's the Boston Uprising taking on the Vancouver Titans. Again, pretty obvious that Vancouver will win, but Boston tends to have tricks up their sleeve that makes matches kind of unpredictable. These are pretty much my 2 favorite teams, so I'm super excited for this match, and I hope it's really good. I want to say 3-2 Vancouver Titans. Then on Friday we have the matches between the middle of the line teams. Atlanta Reign versus Philadelphia Fusion is up first. This would be the 5th versus the 4th seed. I actually think Atlanta Reign is going to take the victory over Philly here. In their previous match it went to game 5 and it was really close. It went to the last round of Ilios, but Philly ended up taking the win. Since then Atlanta has looked really strong, except for maybe in this last week a little bit, but Philly has been pretty inconsistent. Not to mention, I feel like Philly has had some easier matchups than Atlanta throughout the stage, and they still ended up with similar records. Maybe it's just the DeFran hype talking, but I think Atlanta's gonna take it 3-2. And lastly, the 6th team versus the 3rd team, San Francisco Shock versus Toronto Defiant. This one is pretty tough to call. Both teams were involved in the tiebreakers and both teams won the tiebreakers. Of course, San Francisco won a match to do it and Toronto won a coin toss, but they're both in the same situation. I think though Toronto will be able to win it 3-1. And wow, I'm just realizing that I predicted 3 of the final 4 teams will be expansion rosters. I guess that says something about new teams coming into the league. They may not be at as much of a disadvantage as we thought. Anyway, I'm pretty sure given my predictions, it's going to be New York Excelsior versus Toronto Defiant in the first match on Saturday. This will hopefully be a really close match, but I think New York will end up taking it 3-2. I'm definitely not discounting Toronto. They could easily pull an upset against New York, but my gut is telling me probably not. And then Vancouver Titans versus Atlanta Reign. As strong as Atlanta is, and even given how much they pop off, I don't think they can take on the Vancouver Titans. It would take a miracle for Atlanta to win this match, and I suppose it could happen, but I think Vancouver is probably going to take it 3-0. So that brings us to the grand finals for Stage 1, New York Excelsior versus Vancouver Titans. And oh man, is this impossible to call. Both teams are just behemoths in and of themselves. New York, the champion of the original teams. Vancouver, the champion of the new teams. What an incredible story it would be if Vancouver came into the league, went undefeated in the first stage, and then won the entire stage playoffs. And I think that's exactly what's going to happen. New York is an insanely good team, pretty much meta-proof, but I think at least in this meta, Vancouver is a little bit better. I know it's lame to predict the number 1 team will win the bracket, but I've been saying this from the beginning. Vancouver is insane. I think pretty much the only team that can take down New York is them, and they're gonna do it in the stage playoffs this week. So yeah, super hyped for the playoffs, cannot wait. I'll be on Twitter tweeting about all the matches. Make sure you're there, following me at Tangy Nacho to talk about the games. Also, my apologies, turns out this video wasn't as short as I thought it was gonna be because of all the predictions and stuff, but thanks for sticking around to the end. Drop a like and subscribe and maybe I'll make the next video a little bit shorter just for you. Comment below who you think is gonna win the Stage 1 playoffs. Check out some of my other videos, and until we meet again, later people!